Russia. You got a little bit of the communist revolution in the last video lecture. Pretty interesting timing when you consider what's going on today. Anyway, I'm watching the assault on the Capitol building in D.C. Let's see. So I'll again keep it relatively brief. Go through modern Russia, and again in world affairs or in the United States foreign policy, one of our main antagonists has been Russia throughout its history since the time of the revolution of 1917. Russia has been not necessarily friendly toward the West. And again, after World War II, they actually were our ally in World War II. The three major democratic nations, Great Britain, France, United States, and Russia, which is not a democracy, fought together. But basically, they fought on our side to try to eliminate Nazi Germany. But that's a story for another time. Modern Russia is made up of the former, well, this is what the former Soviet Union would have looked like with all of its parts, components. The Soviet Union, or the USSR, consisted of 15 republics. Of those 15 republics, Russia was the largest and is still the largest country in the world. But prior to 1991, all of those colored in countries, the Stans and some of the country, the Baltics, belong to the former Soviet Union or USSR. 1989, Berlin Wall falls. 1991, Russia, or the Soviet Union, dissolves. For a period of 3 years, it was called the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS. But then after 91, many of those countries, or former republics, declared their independence. And Russia became, as you see in red today. So I talked about Nicholas II. So there's Nicholas II. He's the one that will be, his family will be killed by the Bolsheviks or the revolutionaries. Peter the Great was the first of the czars in the 1700s. So 11 emperors and 4 empresses of the Romanov, and that's just the Romanov dynasty. So this lineage, this monarchy of the Romanovs. All right, and then of course came the revolution, and this is Lenin, and this is the royal family. So as I mentioned in the other video lecture, the Romanovs will be executed. The formal Soviet Union will come about in 1922. There's going to be a civil war after 1918, 1919, the whites versus the reds, it's called back in those days. And so the Soviet Union, or the Russia itself, will have a civil war, of which some of the Western powers try to help the non-communist elements of the war. So Lenin is a true Marxist, so he's well versed in Marxist theory, and we went through the theory in the previous video lecture. All right, but now as the leader of the new Russia, he will start to force the socialization or communization of the government, the society. So the natural, they call it collectives. So the natural resources, the industry, the land will all be collectivized and controlled by the government, and then plotted out to these communities they call Soviets. All right. So Lenin actually dies. He has a stroke, I think, in 1921 or 1922. Eventually will die in 1924. But if you go to Russia today, you can go to Lenin's tomb and visit Vladimir Ilyich Lenin as he lies in state in modern day Russia. All right, and then comes Stalin. So Stalin, one of the originals, revolutionaries, was never really highly regarded by Lenin and his inner circle. He was kind of a fringe because he had a horrible temper and was, but they knew that he was a strong man. They knew that he was ruthless and brutal, a brutal man. So Stalin takes the synonym, I guess you would call it, pseudonym, I guess you would call it, of Stalin, which literally means steal.
Julie Weintraub, if you're in the building, please call extension 2164. Julie Weintraub, please call extension 2164.
He will basically take charge of the Communist Party after Lenin's death. He kind of falls into it, or he will just basically eliminate some of the competition. And while he's in power, it is estimated now that during his reign of terror or his collectivization of the economy, over 60 million people will perish between 1925 and 1953. Now, he, not all of that is, that's not, we're not talking murder per se, premeditated murder, but many, he'll have what are called the 5-year plans. And the 5-year plans that he implements to collectivize the farmland and the farmers within Russia, millions will die. So that's part of this reign of terror. He's going to try to create industrialization, similar to what the Chinese will do a few years, a decade or two later. And then he believes in purges. So the purges by Stalin are under Stalin, where anybody who could think for themselves that didn't agree with him. So intelligentsia and people like that. As I said, he was creating a collectivization of agriculture and famine. Creates famine. He creates the gulags, which are in Siberia. So if you were a political opponent, or if you spoke against Stalin, and if you weren't murdered by his secret police, you'd be arrested and sent to the gulags, and basically you would disappear. There's a great book out there called The Gulag Archipelago, for those of you interested in that kind of a storyline. After Stalin will become Khrushchev. Now Khrushchev, for his part, tries to de-Stalinize Russia and the Soviet Union. Strongmen, dictators like Stalin, have what's called a cult of personality. And it's that personality and feeling of security under that personality that people are attracted to and drawn to. And Khrushchev knew that there was going to be a segment of the population that believed Stalin was a good man and a good ruler because of his iron-fisted methods. So he had to try to get rid of that, or eliminate that cult of personality, they call it. And in the process, to try to fix some of the wrongs agriculturally or economically that he had created. All right, he does get into the space race, and the space race leads to basically the height of the Cold War. It becomes us versus them, trying to get to the moon, basically. The Russians, if you don't know, the Soviet Union, are the first to launch satellites. That would be called, that specific satellite is Sputnik. Sputnik. So they basically lobbed this pop can into space. It's got some bells and whistles on it, with lights on it, and show the world that, hey, the Russians, the Soviet Union, this communism is pretty legit because we beat all the Western countries into space. Of course, that'll lead to United States space program being the first on the moon to show the rest of the world that, the world that we are every bit as committed to space as the Russians. The Cuban Missile Crisis is when we are closest to a nuclear war in our history, where Khrushchev had actually was secretly putting nuclear missiles in Cuba, missiles that could reach the United States major cities. And Kennedy sends our military, our Navy, to block these missiles coming over in Russian ships, and basically drew a line in the water and said, "Hey, if you cross this line, we're going to have a nuclear war." And Khrushchev does back down. He does return the vessels back to Russia. But that was kind of the height of the Cold War, and it leads to a stockpiling of weapons at any given time during Khrushchev and follow-on premiers, leaders of Russia or the Soviet Union. We had enough weapons at our peak, probably in the 1980s, late 70s, early 80s, to destroy the world probably 15 times with our nuclear stockpiles, and that's both sides. And it's really what's going to eventually cause the Soviet Union to collapse, as they couldn't keep up with our pace and our technologies. All right. Eventually, a guy by the name of Mikhail Gorbachev takes office, and this is where the beginning of the end. He has a plan called Glasnost, or this new openness, or perestroika, which is restructuring, where he wants to reform all of the Soviet Union. And in the process of him starting this program, it'll lead basically to the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the end of the USSR. So I said that between 1989 and 1991 was what was called the CIS, or Commonwealth of Independent States. That's when the republics separate into their own country or state. And then Russia actually holds elections for the first time in its history. And this guy by the name of Boris Yeltsin wins the election. A proven leader, but also a proven alcoholic. And he will function for a period of time, but then eventually succumb to his inner demons. And that leads to this guy, Putin. So Putin was a member of the KGB, so that's the secret. It's like the CIA of the American intelligentsia government affiliation. So Putin was kind of a low-level KGB agent, but he's kind of making his ways through the ranks, and he gets to know this mayor of Leningrad by the name of Sobchak. And Sobchak will introduce Putin into politics, and he becomes the head of the Committee of External Relations, whatever that means, under the Sobchak in Leningrad, one of the major cities in Russia. All right. So Putin's kind of rise to political power comes through a guy by the name of Medvedev. They had known each other. They are going to co-rule for a period of time, and through Medvedev, Putin has kind of a path into politics. into the bigger picture of politics. And I think the next slide kind of breaks that down. All right, and this is so 1999, 1997, Putin is on a staff of the president. Now, this is Russia. It's the new democratic Russia, so they have a president and a prime minister. It's a little different setup. Yeltsin decides to resign, and Putin will take over. And then this leads to a series of switches. And I got that on the next slide. So that's Medvedev. That picture is of Medvedev. So here was the the timeline basically of Putin. So Yeltsin resigns. So he's temporarily a deputy prime minister under Yeltsin. Yeltsin resigns. He becomes prime minister just for a period of time, 16 August to 31 December. But then he runs is appointed acting president. So from 31 December to 26 March of 2000, he's the acting president. And then he runs for election outright. Let's see, 31 December or 99 to 26 March. Yep. Runs for president outright, 26 March 2000. So he becomes the legitimate elected president of Russia in 2000 for the first time. So he had been kind of dabbling behind the scenes, 99. He's got some part-time acting positions, but he outright becomes president in 2000. And according to the Russian Constitution, you can run for 2 consecutive terms. So he runs 2000, 2004, and was not allowed by the Russian Constitution to run for a 3rd consecutive term. So rather than, rewrite the Constitution, I guess, he runs for prime minister, and he will be elected prime minister 2008 and 2012. After 2012, of course, in his mind, well, it's no longer consecutive, so he should be able to run for president again, and he does, and he serves a 3rd term and begins his 4th term. No, well, actually, 2012, 2016, so yeah, his 3rd and 4th terms, and then runs for president again, because again, this would be his, well, let me think about this one. Was barred from running for a 3rd consecutive term previously. Oh, that's right. He strikes a deal with the prime minister. I think it was still Medvedev, and he's allowed to run for this consecutive term. So in 2018, he's reelected. So he's good to go until 2024, I believe. So really, Putin has consolidated his power. He has been there for 20 years and runs the show. There have been incidents of him ordering assassinations that of course, can never be proven, but of his political rivals, those major outspoken critics of him have been poisoned and disappeared, and so that's all KGB, similar to the KGB era. So he runs his power just like the KGB used to operate back in the old days, in the Cold War. All right. So ultimately, Putin's goal is to not create a Soviet Union reunion, but to be as powerful as the Soviet Union was. There was a bipolar world. The United States and the Soviet Union were the 2 most powerful countries in the world, and he wants to get back to that state, or at least, if not a similar amount of power as the United States, more powerful than the United States. I'm sure he would prefer to be more powerful than the United States. Now, it's been interesting watching the relationship with Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. However, we have, in my opinion, in the last 4 years, if the Russians were going to make any kind of a major move, power move, that would have been the time to do it. But they have not chosen to do that. So we'll see what the next 4 years brings. And I found this a couple of years back. You have to remember Vladimir Putin is an ultra conservative, and this kind of gave a view of Putin's world. He believes in, this Soviet state, this Russian state, and he has basically surrounded by his enemies, and that's kind of what this shows you, is how he views those around him, including the United States. Now, he had a horrible relationship with President Obama. He tolerated President Trump because President Trump kind of groveled over him and fawned over him. Wished he were like Putin, and so the relationship was mutual, I guess. So anyway, that's where we are today, and our relationship, like I said, improved under Trump, but did not improve militarily. I mean, some of the nuclear arms agreements were torn up, and so there's probably more of a threat, a military threat, with Russia today than 4 years ago. But again, we'll see what the next administration comes up with. All right, that's all I have for you. Remember, well, I'll probably move on to China, just 1 or 2 days on China.